Today's session, we're going to discuss the important subject of sustainability and zero carbon in housing for an aging population. So as we're all very well aware, sustainability and housing for our aging population are critical and pressing concerns. As we're trying to create a better future for both our planet and older adults, but also better housing conditions for everybody. We wanted today to explore how we can provide comfortable and eco-friendly living environments for older people while contributing to a greener and more sustainable world. So in this session, we're going to shed a light on some cutting-edge research conducted by Heriot-Watt University, research that explored the intersection of inclusive, age-friendly environments and climate change. We are also going to explore two net zero initiatives. The first, which will be presented by Housing 21, will showcase their net zero scheme in Doncaster and talk more widely about general investment in energy efficiency with the aim to achieve low carbon sustainability. And the second net zero initiative we're going to discuss today is the UK's first net zero carbon retirement community, which is delivered by Inspired Villages in Millfield Green, which is situated in Caddington, central Bedfordshire. Right, so I'm now going to hand over to our first speaker, Ryan Wurich, who is director of the Urban Institute at Heriot-Watt University, and he's also professor in aging and urban studies. So Ryan's research interests include health and well-being, aging in place, and age-friendly cities and community. So the Urban Institute led the Healthy Aging in Changing Climate project, which ran from October 2022 to September 2023. So with the aim to better understand what contributes to the resilience of older people to climate change in the UK and explore how we can ensure age-friendly cities and communities are inclusive and climate resilient. Right, over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Jerome. Can you hear me okay?
Very well,
clear?
Yeah. Perfect.
Thanks for the invite along to the session today, and it's a pleasure to come along and talk about some recent research we've just concluded, and we launched the final report for this project next week, but I just thought I'd come along and talk about some of the key findings that have come out of this research. So as Jerome alluded to, it's been funded by the UKRI, which is the UK Research and Innovation Across Council Initiative that funds academic research, and we were really bringing together these two, what we see as challenges and opportunities, one of healthy aging and aging communities and how we can support people to age well in place, and the other one of climate change. Now, when we talk about climate change in this project, we particularly looked at key challenges around extreme weather, so flooding events, storms, and extreme heat. Whenever I talk about extreme heat, and I'm based up in Edinburgh at Heriot-Watt University, I tend to get a bit of a chortle as people think that heat doesn't impact us in the same ways that it does in other international contexts, but it is all very relative, and some of the work that we did across the UK, which I'll talk about as part of this project, it is impacting communities in unprecedented ways. I think particularly with aging populations, when we talk about people with pre-existing health conditions living in communities, it can be particularly impacted by extreme weather, whether it's existing health conditions and related to extreme heat or weather changes. It can be those that are currently experiencing mobility challenges living in and around communities that might, for example, be impacted by flooding events where people are cut off from vital supplies and services, and it can impact communities in very different ways. So I think one of the things that we found in this project, unsurprising to most of us, is that place matters. You know, where we live and the communities we live in and age in have different forms and access to assets and resources than others. So huge impact and difference between urban and rural communities, for example, in the context of climate change. And our project was designed to understand what will all this mean in the context of age-friendly cities and communities. So for those that don't know, the Age-Friendly Cities and Communities Initiative is a World Health Organization global initiative. It's about over 1,400 cities and communities across the world who are currently signed up to being an age-friendly city and community. It doesn't mean you are one, it just means you're working towards becoming one. There are over 60 in the UK, those 60 cities and communities are coordinated, and the work of those, is coordinated by the Centre for Ageing Better, and much more information on different projects and interventions. Different cities and communities are at very different stages. Some are more national in context and flavours. So the Northern Ireland, for example, have a nationwide commitment to it. There are age-friendly initiatives and regional programmes in Greater Manchester. There are also cities in some small communities. We think this framework provides a nice conceptual lens as well as a key policy driver for climate change, because every one of these dimensions has implications for sustainable communities, environments, and climate change in particular. So we looked at all these and we felt they weren't being given or afforded enough attention within the context of healthy aging. In other words, how can we design resilient cities and communities that support older people to age well, and what we call aging in the right place. So it's not just aging in place and aging at home and community, it's making sure people are surrounded by the resources, amenities and services to respond to extreme weather, prepare for and recover from. So we're taking a more resilient long-term lens rather than one of just, even though they're extremely important, emergency intervention and prevention and response. Aims and objectives were to explore what age-friendly cities and communities, how can they build these climate resilient supports that enable healthy aging in place, identify some of the barriers and opportunities. So climate change has often been framed, or older people has often been framed as a problem or a cause in the climate change agenda, rather than making an active contribution within communities, as many older people we found out in this research do. So it's to challenge those assumptions about, or presumptions about, older people and climate change and their involvement in it, and to try and co-design solutions and supports with different groups, including older people, in order to design actionable interventions to move this agenda forward. Just a note, very brief one, don't have time to go too much through the individual methods that we use, but we tried some applied some creative co-design methods to the process. So we did some community dialogue events. First phase, we had a policy and practice mapping workshop. Then we had community dialogue events, and we went through age-friendly Belfast, age-friendly Cardiff, age-friendly Manchester, and we did work in Edinburgh, who aren't part of the age-friendly cities movement. So a lot of it was coordinated through existing collaborations with the voluntary and community sector. Some of those workshops were intergenerational in scope, so bringing together people of different generations to discuss concerns, challenges around climate change, and how we can best move the agenda forward. We brought some visual graphical illustrators along with us who captured the conversation in various different ways. And then we brought the older people from the community dialogue events. We generated some themes and we took them into what we call co-design workshops. And that was just an opportunity for key organizations, policymakers, practitioners to get together with older people to say, these are the priorities that we've identified from talking to older people. What now do we do about that in terms of designing age-friendly, climate resilient supports? We've got this report out next week, so we took all that data, we analysed it, and we identified around the climate age-friendly cities and communities wheel was a series of cross-cutting dimensions around how we can best support the delivery of climate resilient age-friendly cities and communities. Really strong within that was ensuring that older people have a voice in the climate change process. So ensuring that they can take very active roles within communities. Many already do in terms of pushing climate change initiatives forward at a local level, but also people feel excluded from those current discussions. A real lack of information and awareness about the implications of climate change, and this cut across all dimensions, including the development of climate resilient housing supports, mobilising community infrastructure. How can we ensure that the social and community infrastructure is in place at a local level, that people have those access to social supports which are critical during extreme weather event. Mobility and transport. So we have people during extreme weather that struggle to access the basic amenities and services within their local community. So climate change exacerbated the impacts or extreme weather that people found challenging anyway about moving around their community. So they said actually just getting to this service or this support becomes that much more complex during extreme lack of supports as they were moving around, for example, not being creative or imaginative enough about how we design our urban outdoor environments. A lot to learn from sort of international case studies there about how we can do that better. Sheltered support, green spaces integrated within urban environments, shaded streets, all the different types of interventions that we can do to ensure we can support people to continue to move around even during extreme weather. We have healthcare and well-being, which was critical. What was real central to the research was that climate change is a public health priority at the moment, in terms of how we can continue to connect people to the formal healthcare supports. People talked about those, not getting the home care support into my home, because during extreme weather, it's extremely difficult to do that. But also people and older people sustaining their own healthcare supports as well. So delivering healthcare within homes. Often people were carers for other older people, and how do we continue to deliver those? And just what people felt was the lack of healthcare resources at an everyday level, that if I'm experiencing a flood, how do I respond to this flood, and what resources do I need? A real central role for sort of intergenerational communities and all that, about how we bring people together within communities, the types of intergenerational supports and spaces within the community. And people talked about building on existing sort of community hubs and community spaces in order to deliver climate resilient, age-friendly cities and communities. And the prominent one, and maybe worth a sort of bit more discussion, is the climate resilient housing supports as well, and what people wanted from climate resilient housing. So I think what was key here, that often people were who we interviewed have been displaced as a result of extreme weather. So flooding events, people displaced from home and community. Now this displacement can have long-term health and healthcare impact on older people. So many will experience mental health anxiety as a result of being displaced from home. Now that doesn't just stop when someone's rehoused, so what was key there was making sure that there's wraparound health and wellbeing supports to support people during housing transitions. So as they've moved out of the home and moved back in, that needs to be there, and it needs to be long term. How can people prepare in some of the ways in which they can adapt housing for extreme weather, some of the guidance and information and awareness around what that means for them and how they can do stuff at a very local level. Retrofitting came up, probably unsurprising to some people, about how we can retrofit existing properties, how we can incentivize that process more, about encouraging people to make changes within the homes, but also private landlords, social housing, private housing, right across the sector. People felt a sense of lack of control, sort of ability to make changes to their own properties, didn't really know what changes to make. So many people are saying, don't really know what the implications of climate resilient housing or of housing is going to be on sort of climate change. How can we do more within communities around sort of climate resilient, or notions of climate resilient housing? How can we make sure sustainability is built in very early on in the development process, but that developers have a long-term commitment to delivering on sustainable interventions even after developments have been developed and rolled out? How do we make sure that's a long-term commitment? And whilst a number of national housing strategies have committed to addressing climate resilient housing, Housing 2040 up in Scotland talks about climate resilience as a key aspect of that housing strategy, how do we ensure that that's mapped into interventions and legislation and more regulatory framework for delivering on these initiatives? And that stuff that has often come and gone around lifetime homes and neighbourhoods, that we have flexible homes and flexible housing that will accommodate both the aging body, older people as they get older, and the climate challenges that we'll see coming downstream. So a number of recommendations there, just a sort of subset that I just wanted to cover in some small detail today, Jerome. I'm sure I've sort of hit the 10 minutes there, perhaps. So I'm just going to conclude by saying, we're really keen to engage. This has been a partnership with, as I say, funded by the UKRI, but a partnership with the Stockholm Environment Institute at the University of York, but led out by Heriot-Watt University, but in collaboration with, and the important thing is, in collaboration with the Age-Friendly Cities and Communities movement, but also with the voluntary and community sector and older people driving this forward. So we've had a user advisory group. This is just a start. This is a start of the conversation. It's the building of what we hope will be a programme of research going forward for the next 5 to 10 years. And we're looking for commitment and support and partnerships right across different sectors to deliver on this. So we're part of different things at a local and regional level, and one of these things now is embedding this in terms of impact and policy and practice impact. So we're part of the Greener Later Life agenda, for example, for Greater Manchester Ageing Hub, where we're looking at how we can integrate this into actual specific interventions at a local level. So a number of implications of this around communities, neighbourhoods, and in a national context as well. and we're keen to collaborate. Thanks, Jerome. Am I all right there? Did I finish in 10 minutes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely perfect, Ryan. Yeah,
Great.
I think that was exactly 10 minutes, pretty much. So that's great. Thank you very much, Ryan. Great presentation, very interesting subject. Yeah, sorry, we only have 10 minutes to go through it. I'm sure our audience would love to know more about it.
I should point towards, Jerome, just quickly, the website next week, where we'll be releasing the recommendations and as a report format, and we're just putting the final touches to that report now. So
yeah, we'll definitely share that with our members when it's ready to be shared. So more on this. When do you know when this will be published roughly?
It will definitely be by the end of October.
Okay.
So certainly in the next couple of weeks.
Fantastic. Right. So thank you very much, Ryan, again. So that was great. So just to remind our audience, if you have any questions for our speakers, please post them in the Q&A box, and we'll ask them at the end of the session during the Q&A. All right. So we are now going to move on to the next presentation by Tony Tench, who is the Deputy Chief Executive at Housing21. So Tony is responsible for leading on property development, construction, asset management, building safety, and delivering growth through acquisitions. So Tony joined Housing21 in 2014 and has at least 25 years of experience in housing development, asset management, social care. He's previously held a number of executive roles at Hanover Housing Association, including Director of Extra Care, Director of Strategic Improvement, and Director of Retirement Housing and Property Services. And prior to that, he led on extra care housing development for Anchor Trust. So today, Tony is going to present Housing21 recently completed Patent House and Patent Walk in Doncaster, which is England's largest net zero retirement living scheme, adopting Housing21 low carbon specifications to meet the Future Home Standard and 2050 net zero. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks, Jerome. So I thought you were going to promote me then to chair, which is great. And it's hard to believe that I've got 25 years experience, I know. But anyway, so very, very pleased to be here this afternoon just to talk a little bit about Housing21 and some of the initiatives that we're doing with our properties to try and get to a better position in terms of carbon. So Sally's going to kindly change slides for me. So next slide, I think. So who is Housing21? We're a not-for-profit provider of extra care and retirement living for older people of modest means. That's our focus, our priority. We operate in 240 local authority areas. We manage around just over 23,000 properties. And within our extra care, our preference is to be the care provider as an integrated housing landlord and care provider. And we deliver about 48,000 hours of social care each week. So quite a big care provider as well. So that's the corporate advert over. So next slide. So our board has said that we should be committed to doing no harm in terms of the environment. So that's our positioning. And I thought it's worth just very briefly talking about some of the things that we're doing. So we're going to talk about how we've been adopting modern methods of construction and our low carbon specification for new developments in a minute. We're still aiming to develop about 400 new homes per annum. So that's the sort of scale of our development program. But probably as important, if not more important, is investing in our existing homes and improving the energy efficiency of those. And we've actually managed to get to a position where all our properties are above EPC-C, and with 32% actually at EPC-B. But the driver wasn't necessarily about the environment. We started that journey back in 2015, and the focus was really about affordable warmth for residents. So that's why we're in a fairly good position on the EPCs. But we recognise that we still have an awful lot of fossil fuel heating, and actually so we're having to start to pilot new initiatives such as biomass or air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps in order to identify what model of provision of heating we can deliver in the future. So hopefully that starts to lay some foundations for setting better standards on new developments and existing ones. So if we can go to the next slide, I'd like to talk a little bit about Patent House and Patent Walk. So I think we claim this is the largest net zero modern methods of construction volumetric modular retirement living scheme in England. James might have a question about that later. The scheme was developed to meet our updated low carbon specification, which we actually apply to all of our developments, but in this case, what we were trying to do was get to net zero, so low carbon out everywhere, but this one was very much about getting to a net zero position. And we actually completed the scheme in June of this year, and it's already fully let with residents on social rents. So next slide, please. So we had a very nice opening not so long ago, and I think what we needed to recognise that this was about affordable homes with minimal running costs for residents, and whilst also reducing the impact on the environment. So next slide, please. In terms of net zero, we just thought it's this is the definition from the Energy Saving Trust about achieving a balance between carbon emitted into the atmosphere and carbon removed. I'm sure you all know that. But the scheme achieved net zero in terms of calculations for operating carbon. So this is the carbon of running it day to day. We managed to either offset or actually been able to generate the energy on site and without emitting too much carbon. In terms of embodied carbon, so the carbon that's actually in the construction of the scheme, because it was effectively built in a factory by modules, that means we've managed to reduce the embodied carbon by an estimated 70% compared to traditional build, so significantly cleaner in that sense. Next slide, please. We've managed to get to this position by working in partnership with the team for a number of years. So we've done a number of smaller developments prior to this, just to understand the product. We work with a company called MAR, who are the developer, and Henry Riley as our employer's agent and modular consultant. And we're very fortunate to be supported by Doncaster Council and Homes England with funding. And we were very proud to win recently the Offsite Awards as Client of the Year for this particular development. So next slide, please. So the scheme, it's not a particularly big scheme, but it's 20 homes for social rent. There's 8 bungalows, 12 apartments, 6 one-bedroom and 6 two-bedroom. We've tried to use high-performing efficient technologies throughout. We've got air source heat pump for the water heating. We've got high insulation values and air tightness, as you'd expect, so an air tightness of 2. We've got mechanical ventilation and heat recovery for better ventilation and also retaining heat within the properties where possible. And then we've used photovoltaic panels that are fitted to the roofs to be able to provide for electric heating when it's needed as a bit of a boost in the flats. Next slide, please. So, very nice citation from people that are living there. That hopefully we've created some really nice properties that people want to enjoy. It's very affordable. And I think the key for me is that we understand how people live in such a very different type of property. So if I go to the next slide, please, Sally. We need to work with the residents because we recognise that it requires a different way of living in many respects. Don't open the windows necessarily quite as quickly, and there's quite a lot of technology in the property, air source heat pumps, mechanical ventilation, etc. So we think there's going to be some learning and some lessons learned from residents about how they enjoy living in the properties. And also, as a test, we want to understand the energy use in this particular development compared to the energy use in another scheme that's recently been completed, but completed in traditional construction, so that we can see whether or not in practice this actually has the impact that we want, which is effectively to minimise energy costs for residents. So on a very practical level, we'll be able to test that theory out. Next slide, please. So I've talked a bit there about development and the Patent House Pace of Walk, but I also thought it was important to acknowledge where we're at with our existing homes. So we invest about £36 million a year in our properties, and we, as I mentioned before, we're very proud to have got to a position where all our properties are at least EPC C or above. We recognise that actually it's more sustainable to invest and remodel, refurbish existing properties and give them a good life, rather than to knock everything down and rebuild it. So we're on currently our process for growth includes acquisition. We've been acquiring from quite a number of other providers, certainly general needs providers. With over 1,700 homes over the last 5 years. And we believe that we've now got a model where we can improve the homes, get those up to a high standard, and also improve the service for residents. And effectively, that's probably a more sustainable route than effectively knocking everything down and rebuilding things. So our property standards, we're very keen on making sure kitchens, bathrooms, etc., they're all modern, they're all contemporary, nothing over 20 years old. And I think quite importantly, we have an interior design team that we employ internally, and they make sure that those communal spaces in our extra care and our retirement living are exciting, attractive places where people want to spend time, because we think that that's quite key to making it a place that people are proud to live. So next slide, please. So a little bit of an explanation of where we're at with the design, and we also make sure that everything is dementia friendly and comfortable for a variety of different people's needs. Next slide, please. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Jerome, I think you're on mute. Unless that's just mine.
Sorry.
No, there we go.
Classic. I was just thanking Tony. Thank you very much, Tony. And just as your last slide said, any questions? So for our delegates, if you have any questions, please post it in the Q&A box. Right, so we are now going to move on to James Wilcox. So James is head of sustainability at Inspired Villages. So James is he's head of sustainability for Inspired Villages. It's a £500 million backed joint venture between Legal and General Capital and NatWest Pension Fund. And it's part of the Cambridge University Achieving Net Zero Cross-Industry Working Group, delivering the Carbon Reduction Code, as well as being a former non-executive board member of Sustainability West Midlands. So today, James is going to talk to us about the UK's first net zero retirement village, which is being delivered by Inspired Villages in central Bedfordshire. So over to you, James.
Great, thank you, Jerome. Thank you for the intro as well. So yeah, let's plow straight into it. So a little bit about our distribution at the moment. We've got, we've got 8 operational villages, which are those that are shown in black, and all of the others are either under construction or in some form of pre-construction or negotiation on the land, with a view to take our portfolio up to 34 villages. So quite a lot of growth over the next sort of reasonably short-term period, in truth. And our overall approach to ESGH, as we term it here, is very centered on giving our residents, as you know, as the company strapline, the best years of their lives, but it's very people focused. So aside from the net zero product that I'll be talking a little bit more about today, we also have a goal that we deliver this measurable social impact, and we can really demonstrate a wider positive impact, particularly on our age group, as they come into one of our villages and experience all of the benefits associated with that. I quite liked a phrase that Ryan mentioned, where about creating these age-friendly cities. We're very much about creating a small community where our residents are surrounded by all of the amenities that they need. And I think that in and of itself is a sustainable model for the future. And so all I've got here is a summary graphic which really sort of summarizes the entire strategy on one piece, but this is essentially what we're looking to deliver. And in terms of the net zero side of the business, we've outlined a roadmap which really starts with the development in Bedford, which is Millfield Green, or Caddington to give it its construction name. And that will be our first net zero regulated energy scheme. So yeah, Tony, we can arm wrestle over terminology later, but that's where we're saying ours is net zero regulated energy. And as we move forward into 2025 and beyond, then that will also include unregulated energy as well. And there are a series of touch points that we've set ourselves across the next few years to ensure that we are progressing steadily on that overall net zero journey. So here's just a very sort of quick high-level intro to the scheme at Millfield Green. So we're essentially talking about a central village core. That's the key bit of phase one, really, and all of the things that you would expect to see for a scheme that's going to deliver net zero are there. There's a renewable energy centre, so we tend to take a centralised approach to the way we distribute energy, and then obviously all of the usual suspects like PV, ground source energy in this particular case, and electric vehicle charging. And I'll come on at the end to talk about some of the operational monitoring, which again, Tony mentioned that's important for his scheme, and I think it's a really key part of delivering net zero. But let's look a bit more at some of the key points from this particular project. So we've got 86 units in phase one, so that's a really big one for us, as I say, focused around that village core, which has all of the communal facilities, so restaurant, cafe, library, cinema, swimming pool, you name it. This is a centre parks for the later living community, and then above that would be individual apartments, basically. It's due to hand over literally any day now, as soon as we get the final odds and ends done on site. And the approach we've taken is one through Fabric First, so future home standard, U values and air permeability, MVHR, PV, and as I say, in this particular case, ground source heat pumps. Some of our other current schemes also use air source heat pumps. And I've included a bit more detail here on the specifics. We used the Kenza shoebox system, so each apartment has its own individual little pump unit inside the airing cupboard, and then in the main facilities there is a preheat and then a top-up system using slightly smaller heat pumps, which is, to be honest, it's the same combination, just in a slightly different way that we would use if it was an air source scheme. So here are some pictures of some of that. We've got top left on your screen, as you see it, will be the main heat pump units in the energy centre. And then on the top right hand side, you can see a shot across to one of the smaller apartment blocks. This is the only one that's included as part of the phase one. The remaining phases, of which there will be 3 more, will be all very typical of that type of construction. And you can just see the sheer volume of PV panels that we have to include on the roof in order to meet the net zero regulated standard. And then the bottom 2 shots are inside the VC, and that's the underfloor heating, which has gone in there. Now, in terms of creating a sort of a comfortable environment for our residents, underfloor heating is, for us, we feel, the way to go. We're removing the sort of the hot contact surface, if you like, but we're also creating a very comfortable ambient internal temperature that is one that I think creates a very pleasant environment to be in, and is something that's quite important to our residents. we can see here, and apologies for this, it's the best photo I could get, unfortunately. This is the shot inside one of the airing cupboard units. So I've drawn the arrow to the little Kenza shoebox pump, which is inside each of the apartments, down on the bottom left there. But then you can see there's a very typical, I think that'll probably be about 150 litre hot water cylinder that goes alongside that. So, you know, to kind of go into and walk around and get the feel of, it would be largely similar to anyone's expectations from a normal, in inverted commas, new build dwelling that you would see these days, except of course for the fact that you get this slightly smaller white box that sits in the airing cupboard rather than a combination boiler. Looking at how all of this is actually going to be verified, because I think that's the most important thing. We're working with our contractor, which is Wilmot Dixon in this particular case, who are undertaking a study for us that started in the design stage. So rather than doing a traditional Part L model, we actually did an enhanced TM54 based predictive model. So all of the unregulated loads are actually in that model. And what we are doing is applying a much more realistic operating scenario to those. So outside of those sort of restrictive models that Part L normally makes us stick to, which gives us a good idea of how much energy should be coming essentially through each individual distribution board, each individual meter within both the VC and the individual cottage buildings. Then it becomes a case of making sure that that is what is actually delivered on site. So there's soft landings has been followed on this project, and we've gone to some quite extensive measures to verify the installation of things like the underfloor heating and the commissioning of some of those renewable technologies. And we've also installed additional heat meters, sensors, and other metering so that we can make sure that those energy usages that are broken down into a stacked graph, like you can see on the right-hand side there, can actually be broken out. And then once the building and the selection of the cottages becomes operational, we will have monthly reports that are produced to show what the actual energy consumption is against the predicted energy consumption from this enhanced energy model. And in that way, we will be able to keep a running check of whether we are actually meeting, first and foremost, the net zero. But secondly, we'll have really early indication of any energy defects and be able to sort those hopefully before anybody really knows they've even properly occurred. So in the 10 minutes we've got, that is as much detail as I can really go into, but I've just included a couple of final shots there just to give you a bit more of a flavour of the scheme overall and how it's looking at the moment. And I think that is pretty much me. Thank you, Joe.
Great. Thank you, James. Thank you. Looks absolutely amazing. That place makes me want to move there. Looking forward to report on it and report on the developments. That's brilliant. So we are now going to move to the Q&A session. So thank you everybody for sticking to time. It's very impressive. We're right bang on time. So we don't have that many questions today, which is surprising, but it's probably also a testament to how clear your presentations were. So thank you for that. But I'm just going to start with a question from Suzanne May. So she's asking a question that's for you, James. As a scheme which looks like it has single aspect flats, how will you manage the risk of poor ventilation and overheating?
Yeah, that's a good question. And in some cases, that is definitely true. They are single aspect flats. So first and foremost, we've got the MVHR system in there, which has the summer overheating mode. So there's the ability to be able to provide an additional boost. But obviously, if the external air temperature is warm anyway, that's only really working to a certain point. But so we have put a lot of work into specifying the right kinds of glazing and to looking at how we can maximize the free airflow into those apartments, because it is something that we're acutely aware of, and it's part of the sort of future climate change adaptation, if you like, of our estate as it evolves. I was actually, just before I came on to this session, in a meeting with a window supplier, window manufacturer, to look at what the evolving solutions are around this, so that we can maintain the U value but have a high G value, so that we can stop those excess solar gains. And we're also, where possible, trying to orient, all the things we should do, orientate the building in the right way, use the building almost to shade itself without going to the extent of having to put on bespoke brise soleil or louvers or anything like that.
Okay. All right, thank you. I think, Tony, you raised your hand. You wanted to? No. So there's just another question that's come through from Shannon Conway. So that's both for Tony and James. So we'll probably start with Tony. So do your residents pay their own energy bills, or is it included in service charge and rent?
Yeah, so for new developments, our preference, wherever possible, is for residents to pay their own energy costs, so that they've got more choice about how they do that. That might actually get harder as we apply more modern technology to try to get to a net zero position. But that's a principle that we're trying to hang on to at the moment, is that we, wherever possible, we would ask residents to have their own metered supply.
Okay.
And for ours, we actually, our residents will pay their bills through a service charge. So on our new schemes, Millfield Green in particular, having that EPC for the communal space to say, look, this is an A+, this is as efficient as it can be, is I think a definite plus in that respect. We have some older villages in the portfolio where residents do pay their own bills, and there we are working really closely with them to say, well, okay, what can we do to those older buildings to retrofit them, either with PV or would they be suitable for a heat pump, what have you, what's going to happen with those in the future.
Okay, thank you both. So next question. So it's a bit of a tough one, I suppose, but one for you, Ryan. So how can Ryan's type of project succeed in changing policies so that UK places are generally more resilient, especially given poorly maintained infrastructures such as flood protection and keeping drains clear? Sorry, you're muted, Ryan.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think with the research in sort of making recommendations, which is about how we can sort of deliver on some of this stuff, is that infrastructure and physical infrastructure is critical to that resilience, and I think we pulled out a lot of things related to social and community infrastructure in the research, which are about the importance of sort of social networks and communities coming together to around self-build and responding to climate weather events in ways that will build on existing skills that are currently there within communities, and a real focus on that. I think that was quite a strong message from our communities. But there is, I think without doubt, that investment in physical infrastructure is needed. Flood protection schemes, and as Ro mentioned there about keeping drains clear, and place maintenance was a real strong aspect of what we talked about in the research, particularly around public transport. And actually maintenance and place maintenance acts as a barrier to getting out of the home, but it's equally important in accessing some of the mobility and transport links around communities. And a lot more work needs to be done around that, which is the physical infrastructure to support climate resilience. I mean, I'd echo what Rose said there, and said, we definitely need more of that, and we need investment in it.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. The next question. Yes, I saw one for James. How much future carbons? So that's a question from Philip Littlehales. How much future carbon saving performance will be dependent on, first, staff training, and secondly, residents being trained?
Yeah,
For example, not just open window. Yeah.
It's a good question, because I've certainly seen many projects before that have been built to the highest standards, and as soon as you put people in them, it all falls down. So it will be hugely important. We've done everything we can to ensure the buildings are as simple to operate as possible. So they're not trying to be too clever. They're trying to, be as traditional as they can be using these new technologies. But that's really the importance of carrying out that post-completion monitoring, because it's going to really drive home the impact of, if you do X, then the impact on the energy consumption is Y. And that helps our staff to understand the impact of those particular things. But I think most importantly, we can really engage the residents groups in that. Each of our villages has a residents association. They're really switched on. They want us to share information. And if we can go to them and say, well, look, if we drop the pool temperature by 1 degree, this is what the impact will be on energy saving, and that will come off the service charge. And it's really powerful information. So I think it's a huge element of it, one that we won't ignore.
Great, thank you, James. Tony, or was there something you wanted to add to that? Do you want to comment on this question?
Yeah, I can do. So I agree with James. It's about the monitoring and being able to understand the lessons learned from using this new technology. We've certainly had some real challenges with residents about trying to explain ambient heat systems in the past, underfloor being a particular issue for us, as well as other ambient heat systems. And they just want to be able to feel a radiator and know that it's on. So recognizing that there will be challenges around, I suspect, MVHR, and even though they're incredibly fantastic systems and well fitted, etc., there's still a low hum. And if there's a low hum, people want to turn it off, and then you're opening windows, and then you've got your radiators on. And so I think that's partly why we need to understand the impact to support residents to get the best out of the property, and then monitor it against traditional build as well, so that we've got some evidence to say whether or not it really makes a difference.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a question from Judith Derbyshire. So it's a question for you, Ryan. Have any studies been done of healthy aging and climate change in rural areas? In Cumbria, we have a super aging population and reducing workforce, especially in the deeper rural areas. Storm Desmond impacted strongly on many rural villages and especially on older households, with care workers having to travel into places like the Central Lake District. Bad weather can affect support for older residents.
Yeah, no, that again was particularly came out in our Belfast research. It's made from Northern Ireland across the rural counties there. We have strong representation from older people, and what was critical there is the message that this isn't about urban communities for a lot of people. It's not about age-friendly cities. That actually people can be living in very remote sort of rural spaces that are disproportionately impacted by climate change, like flooding and storms. I mentioned Storm Desmond there, but and other impacts of extreme weather. And that access to healthcare supports about how you do that and deliver that in rural communities, specifically with policy agenda like 20-minute neighbourhoods and living locally and all the rest of it. Well, how do you actually deliver on that within rural communities? And a lot of the best practice we saw from Northern Ireland that have been doing stuff around how we can support healthy aging rural communities, particularly around climate change. A lot of that was built on and sustained, and I'm not sure we've done this everywhere, on things that resulted from the pandemic, which we were often forced into doing. So when we talk about crisis and weather events, there's actually a lot of learning there from what happened during the pandemic, where those strong informal supports within communities come together. So, I can't get out of my house to go and access food. Are there some connections locally that will enable people to do that? Social eating campaigns and other things in rural communities. And a strong sense in some rural areas of coming together during the pandemic. The other aspect to that was, and how we can build and retain that during resilience to extreme weather. But the other aspect to it was how we can ensure that particularly in rural communities, is the role of digital support and technologies. It was, as we know, quite a it's a controversial one, particularly those living in rural communities who are often excluded from internet access, and older people and digital poverty and other issues that impact rural communities and urban. But you know, is ensuring that how can we ensure that we can utilize technology in ways that will support older people in the right ways, and often they've or sometimes they've excluded older people, not necessarily included them. But technology, the role of technology, assistive technologies in supporting older people in rural areas, but not just relying on that, because I think there's a really strong message that, you know, the softer aspects of care were hugely important, and face-to-face in-person stuff was critical to identifying barriers to aiding, particularly during extreme weather, when people can be cut off from internet supports quite easily during flooding events. Sorry, not an easy answer there. I don't think I've answered it, but probably addressing more the complexities there, more the questions that we've got. But yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough question. But thank you very much, Ryan. We've got a question from Robin Darton. He's asking regarding the traditional design using orientation, glazing, etc., which James referred to earlier, to cope with increasing temperature. Is there a case for rethinking building design, drawing on the design of buildings in hotter countries?
I think in a word, yes, there is. The challenge for us as developers is getting planning. So often the aesthetic will be heavily influenced by what the planners want. So we can't always do what we want to be able to do with the built form. So there'll be certain constraints there. There's also, I think, a slight conflict, and there has been a question in the other chat as well from Mark Thomas about embodied carbon. So yes, Mark, we do have plans to tackle that as well. But clearly, once we start adding thermal mass, we start adding embodied carbon. So we've got to try and find, this is us as an industry, find our way through the best overall solution there, and how we start to unpick it. But I think there are definitely lessons that we can learn from other parts of the world as our climate begins to change, about how we might adapt.
Ryan or Tony, do you want to comment on this one?
I just support what James has just said. There's lots we can learn from other countries, but I do think that we're certainly having to ensure that we've got air conditioning in our schemes now for the future, which causes more of a problem with embodied carbon. But yeah, absolutely, it's a necessity, particularly in our extra care schemes.
I think the things, just to touch on, build up on the age-friendly work, is that there's a huge amount of international research, particularly in countries where climate changes. And this has been impacted over the last sort of 10, 15 years. We've seen some real innovation in public spaces in Brazil, right across the global south. For example, we've done some work in Colombia, looking at the role of public space. I didn't touch on it today, but how that can be designed in ways that will support climate resilience. In terms of people getting around communities, I think there's a huge amount to learn there that we can be bringing back into policy and practice in the UK without rushing into sort of policy transfer assumptions. But you know that things necessarily will, if they work in other countries, might not work here. But there are some real great examples of international work in the climate resilience and healthy aging space as well. Yeah.
Thank you. There was so that's relating to your presentation, James. There was a question about the amount of space the air source heat pumps take up, and the question is a fairly simple one. Is the shoebox air pump that you mentioned, is it a good option for saving space? Then is it the reason why you went for this? Yeah.
Yes, I think the trade-off is, of course, that capital expenditure on a ground source system is huge. And it impacts much more on the critical path for the construction program. So, you know, it's not a silver bullet, but from a space-saving perspective, yes, that box. If I had a better photo, you'd have got a sense of the scale, but it really isn't very big at all.
Thank you. So we've got about 4 minutes left. I think we've gone through most of the questions, if not all. So I just wanted to maybe just go around the table starting maybe with Ryan, as you were the first speaker. Is there a final message you want to pass, or a question you may want to ask James or Tony?
I had one actually for Tony, if you don't mind me.
Sure.
Well, actually James as well, but it's Tony that mentioned it was about behavioural change, and that actually different housing interventions bring about changes in lifestyles, and just to expand a bit on what this kind of behaviour change will be, and how we best capture it, because I think you're right, it's changing the way we kind of currently do things. I know we talk about a lot in age-friendly citizen communities, that interventions through that will promote or support better climate resilient behaviours at a local level, whether that's through active travel, public transport, getting people out and into the community. I just wonder if you had any thoughts, particularly in the context of housing and intervention there, Tony. I know you touched upon it a bit.
Yeah, so there's lots of positive things that we can be doing in terms of helping people think about the environment more generally. But I guess my anxiety is we're investing in all this technology to create environments that are net carbon friendly, and I do think that some residents will find that quite difficult because it is very different to what they're used to. And I think I quoted the example earlier about radiators. We have that and have had that all the time, where we've used ambient heating systems, ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps. It's such a different way of being to having a nice radiator. I turn the radiator on, I turn the thermostat up, I expect to be able to feel it straight away. And so helping residents understand what that is going to take time, and it's about having the ambient heat is quite a tricky one, because it does take time for people to adapt to that, in our experience anyway.
Thank you, Tony. James, did you want to make a final comment? Or?
Well, I mean, just on Ryan's question, Tony's right. We get the same sorts of comments from some of our residents about the lack of radiators, say, for example. So there's definitely a piece to be done there. But I think that's where the importance of having the data. So, both Tony and I have spoken about the monitoring of these projects once they're complete, not just saying it's net zero and moving on to the next one. That becomes so important in engaging the users and the residents in that process, because you can actually sit them down and say, look, as I said earlier, if X, then Y. And they're intelligent people, they get it. It's just helping them understand and taking them through the journey, I think, a little bit, and making sure that that's not the bit that we ignore.
Right. So it is now 5 p.m. So I'm afraid that's it for today. But I wanted to thank you again, Ryan, James, and Tony, for your presentations. That was a really very interesting session, very important session. So lots of great information, and we look forward to keeping our members up to date on the developments of your projects. So thank you to the audience too. I see that lots of them are already leaving. 5 on the dot. So thank you for your questions and your comments. And just a quick note about our next session. So our next session will be held next week on the Tuesday, the 17th of October. And it will focus on collaborative housing and care solution. And we'll be discussing the latest research and practice from Europe and England in the relational and collaborative housing and care. So you can already book your place. I think Sally has placed the URL to that event page in the chat box. And also one last reminder before I say goodbye, please complete the very short feedback form that will appear on your screen when we close the session. Right. Thank you, everybody. See you all soon.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.